So I want to take a little bit of time to talk about what happened with Asmongold, because I feel like it's important. And I think when something happens that's wrong, sometimes it's really vital that people weigh in on that and draw attention to it and start to make some noise. Because it's sort of like somebody who's doing something wrong in the workplace, okay? You could call a person out and say, hey man, that's wrong. You shouldn't do that. That person might get indignant and they might say, how dare you criticize me? How dare you call me out like that? And on the surface, you would think, well, they just shrugged me off. They just ignored my criticism and it didn't make any difference. But if you were right and they were wrong, then they're going to potentially think about that and they might correct themselves and they might say, you know what? Yeah, I'm not going to admit that I was wrong, but yeah, I probably should kind of change my behavior in the future. So calling an audible is very important when we see something that's wrong, when we have a free society, a progressive society, and we see something which is a fundamental threat to that society. We have a duty to say something and use our liberty to protect each other. It's kind of like people who say their vote doesn't matter because, after all, one vote isn't going to sway an election. Well, that's true, but it's also true that if a lot of people give up on the process and they start saying, well, my vote doesn't matter, I don't care, and they just don't vote, and then we go to a system where it's not a democratic process at all, that's not good. So even if you feel like your voice is just a tiny splash in the bucket and it's kind of pointless to say something, every voice that is heard by anyone makes some kind of a difference, some kind of an impact, and it sends a signal that even the most powerful will, to some degree, take into consideration. So what happened? I guess the bottom line is, in a nutshell, Asmongold expressed a political opinion that people didn't like. That's the bottom line. And the purpose of this video, my thoughts, is not to weigh in on the political opinion which Asmongold had. In my opinion, I watched the video, I saw what he said, and even if you proceed to say that his delivery was rough and abrasive, the message that he was delivering was not foundationally incorrect. It was not fundamentally hateful. And anyone who feels like his message was a message of hate is simply taking it out of context because they want to. That's the bottom line. But I'll also digress and say that's just my opinion. I don't feel in any way offended by what Asmongold said. And I will also say that I don't like people who give me the vibe that they're hateful, intolerant folks who are just trying to cause trouble. And there's a lot of people who are like that. One reason why I've always liked Asmongold is because he's not like that. He's a content creator who has a very large following. And he's also a person who feels very authentic. He's made so many videos talking about his personal life in a raw, organic way. You just know he didn't make it up so that he could get likes. He just shares the truth, the good, the bad, the ugly about his life. And that's something that I have very much appreciated. I would go so far as to say that Asmongold is one of the few content creators that really has made a lasting impression on my perception of what good content looks like on YouTube. He's somebody who I would want to kind of emulate in terms of producing authentic content where it's just spoken from the heart and it's not really scripted. I think he's a good guy. I think that if I had the opportunity to do so, it would be cool to hang out with somebody like him, because he just seems like a good character. And he does a really good job of fusing real life issues with gaming. And most of the things Asmongold talks about on his streams are actually things that interest me, whether it's a talk about politics or it's a talk about gaming. And what bothers me the most about this is the fact that when somebody says something that's unpopular and then they get a backlash and then they're put on the spot and they have to walk their comments back, that's censorship. That's self-censorship which follows. Eliminates a person's ability to be authentic and to be their true self. And that has nothing to do with whether you agree with or disagree with a person's opinion. It's important, if we want a society which respects and values free speech, that we protect the atmosphere of being permissive of all speech. Because if you only allow the speech that you agree with, the speech that feels non-abrasive, the speech that aligns with one particular ideology, or the speech that is safe, the end result is a totalitarian end of liberty, which mandates inclusion by excluding anything that is different or other. It's like the difference between the Federation in Star Trek and the Borg, between empowering a diversity of different voices and mandating inclusion at the point of a gun. It sets a very bad precedent, because the truth is, if it can happen to a major voice in the community, it can happen to anyone. Now, the truth of the matter is, there's things I could probably say and not worry too much about it, because I don't have a huge following. I don't have a huge structure of monetization and business built on the necessity of continuing to create content on a platform. I'm just doing it because I want to. And I think the truth is, maybe the reason why this probably cuts so deep is that Asmongold also is a content creator that's doing what he's doing because that's what he loves. And when people attack someone who's doing what they love, it's not just putting speech under threat. It's not just harming content creation. It's also harming that individual. And I think the worst possible thing you can do is make somebody a victim of hate and then gaslight them and tell them that despite the fact that you are the one doing harm to them, you're the victim. It's like an abusive relationship where somebody says, I'm going to do harm to you, but if you would have been a better spouse or a better lover or done what I wanted, then you wouldn't have put me in a position where I wanted to hurt you. So therefore, it's your fault, despite the fact I'm the one who did the harm. It's your fault because you provoked me. And then you have somebody who's been backed in a corner, somebody who's been harmed, and the aggressor paints themselves as the victim. And that is a shame. I also think it's a terrible shame the way so often we see this. Some special interest group, a large corporation, doesn't like what somebody says or does, and then they strong arm them behind the scenes, they threaten them, and then they make that person act like they're apologizing, or they make a person resign, and everyone thinks it's because it was that person's idea, but really it had nothing to do with that person and everything to do with the fact that they were the victim of retaliation, and they got into a situation where they just didn't have the leverage to do anything other than to comply with whatever they were strong-armed into. I've seen it in the corporate world. It's kind of like the election. We have this whole deal where Joe Biden said he was going to be running for president, and then suddenly he wasn't. And everybody says, well, that was just his idea. And he says, yeah, that was just his idea. So you mean to tell me you expect me to believe that? No. I think more likely he had a bad debate. The winds shifted against him, and the powers that be said, you know what, Joe, you're not going to run. Too bad. It doesn't matter whether you want to or not. You're done. And so he has to go out there and then make it look like it was his idea all along to step aside. And then he's got to beat the drum of the new agenda that's replaced him. And that's kind of how I feel when I look at Asmongold's apology. I support him 100%, and I can't imagine what it's like to be in that situation, to have your livelihood put under threat just because somebody forms a mob and hates you for a political opinion that you've dared to express. I hope that in the content creation community, we continue to have voices of people who express opinions, whether they're popular or not, which come from the heart, instead of being canned content that is pumped out by special interest groups. And I always think bullying in any situation, whether it's a relationship, whether it's a job, whether it's in politics, it's always wrong. And you can get lost in the weeds arguing over whether somebody should or should not have said something. But the reality is, a free society thrives only when people can feel like they can say anything without the risk of retaliation or threat. Whether that's in a public space or a private space, we need a society which treats respect for all ideas, even the unpopular ones, as a paramount cornerstone. And if we don't have that, all of us, not just the people with a target on their back, pay a portion of the price. I don't want to be afraid that I can't say what's on my mind. And I don't think anyone should have that fear. And I think it's absolutely a shame that we've seen all the backlash that's happened and everything play out the way it did. And of course, I'll continue to be a big fan of Asmongold. I'd imagine he's a big enough content creator. Probably all of you have already watched him many times, but if you haven't, I would strongly recommend it. He's not everybody's cup of tea, but I will tell you, in my opinion, there's very few content creators I would really recommend, and people who are just real, for lack of a better term. And I think that you know, I think the internet needs more folks like him out there. Hopefully he doesn't become neutered and stop pumping out content that is authentic. I would hope, and we'll see how that all goes. But I just felt like, you know what? I know it's all the craze. Everyone's talking about it. And I think this is one of those times when we should be talking about it. We should be talking about it because when something bad happens to one of us, especially those of us who are part of the gaming space, it really is a wrong which has been done to all of us. So if nothing else, this is just a message of solidarity and appreciation to a content creator that I always have respected and always will respect. That's it.